You're recording.
Hi, welcome to Simsbury Free Library's Genealogy 101. We have our genealogist, Alison Watson, who will be sharing her the help and strengths of genealogy and how to find exploring your roots.
Hi, everybody. We have people who have different levels of experience today, so we're going to just kind of go through this. It may be a little basic for some people and a little bit too much for others. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. I've been doing my family's genealogy for over 40 years. Like some of the other people that I've talked to today, I inherited it, sort of, and it became a real passion. So anyway. I have been to several classes. I most recently completed certificate in genealogical research at Boston University, and I'm a member of several genealogical societies. So I'm going to start real quick. If I go too fast, stop me. If I'm going too slow, stop. Tell me to move on, and we'll go from there. All right. Okay, I have this. So. Best thing to do is start with what you know. That's how you start. You have your paper with scratches on it, and include everything you can find out from yourself and from your family, your parents, your siblings, your spouses, their children, your siblings, your siblings, spouses, and children. Any information you can get about them, dates of birth, dates of marriage, dates of death, anything like that. You can even write down what you know to be true, what you've heard to be true, even though if it's not true, write it down and note where you got that information from. You'll find that some things are true and many things are not. Reach out to relatives if possible. Conduct interviews with people to get more information. Again, your parents, your siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins. It's important to take notes or record these interviews with dates, times, and locations, and the names of the people interviewed so that you can go back to them someday if you have further questions, or at least when you're putting your stuff together, you can document where you got the information. Research can be done depending on where you live. You can do it locally in a library, at a town hall. If you live further away from those types of areas, or where your relatives live, you can do a significant amount of research at different websites online that are some are available for free, some are by subscription. We'll talk about websites a little bit more later on. The most important thing to remember is don't believe everything you see out there. Many local or state libraries carry the subscription websites for you. You don't have to, you can use them at no cost. Sometimes they have a little bit of limitation, but not much, not enough to speak of. And it closed at the end of the presentation is a list of links that you can go and look at. I cannot say this enough. Cite your sources. Cite your sources. Wherever you get information, write it down. There's a whole plethora of books that are out there to show you how to cite sources. I'd probably be murdered if I actually said this out loud to too many people, but you know, it's more important that you cite the source than that you get it perfectly formatted. There should be a source for every item you have in your file, even if the source is you. So if you're writing down the information about your children, you're the source. Because if something happens and you have to pass it on to somebody, like it passed on to you, and like it passed on to me, I had this beautiful genealogy on one family, and there was no sources, not one. So essentially, I had to do that work all over again. If the information you received was from another person, note that and include the name of the person on the provided information and the date and the location you received it. Keep track of the research you've performed on a person and where that information originated. Verified sources are those in which you can see the actual record and what it tells you. Unverified sources are those that are hearsay or may be available online, but you can't see them, see the item in question to show that the statement is true. most of the reputable websites will have transcriptions or images. It's best if you can have an image, but if you can't, they're not making stuff up. The problem is that whoever's transcribing what they're looking at may not see the same thing you see. So it's good to see the image yourself. And you might not agree with the way it was transcribed, but there's different types of source reliability. Information by someone with firsthand knowledge of the event is considered a primary source. For example, you would be a primary source for the births of your children, or your marriage, or your divorce, or perhaps a death in the family if you were there. Information provided by someone with secondhand knowledge is a person that's considered a secondary source. So, for example, your grandparent died in the other state and you got a phone call. You're now a secondary source. You weren't there. You didn't see it happen. The source of information from someone with firsthand knowledge is preferred over the source of a secondhand source, but obviously that's not always possible. And there's ways around that to bolster up the information if you need to. Original sources are sources that are presented in their original format, not transcribed. Some people, some scholars say that an image is almost as good as an original source. The problem with images is that they can be adjusted, digital images. A secondary source is a source that's transcribed and heard verbally or otherwise noted that it's not found in the primary format. Original sources are preferred over secondary sources, but a lot of times they're not available. Like I said, images of original sources can be considered original even though technically they are not the original in the original format.
Can you give an example of what an original source would be?
A birth certificate.
Okay.
Like if you went to town hall, you had copies of your children's birth certificate or your marriage record, or those are right. Those are original sources. If you're seeing if somebody wrote it down for you, you know, if you didn't want a copy of the record and somebody wrote it down for you because they had access to it, that's a transcribed source. That's not an original source. You're trusting that the person that wrote it down for you made the correct transcription.
So if it's a copy, would that still be considered original?
Again, that's similar to a digital image. You know, some people consider that an original source. I think a lot of people consider that an original source. There is some concern that digital imaging can be altered.
Oh.
But I mean, that would really be stretching. There's also 3 different types of evidence. Evidence is what you use to build a case to finding the answer to a question. There's direct evidence when the source answers the question by itself. So for example, if the question that you're looking for is, what is the date of birth of my grandmother, and you have a birth certificate that says my grandmother's date of birth was January 2nd, 1898, that's a direct, that's direct evidence. Indirect evidence, the source is important and it's relevant, you need additional information. For example, if you look at a census, and in the 1900 census, if you look at a census and it says they were born in March of 1886, that's a second. That's indirect evidence. It's you know, it's saying that that's when they were born, but you don't really know. Or in most censuses, you just have an age, so it's indirect evidence of what year they were probably born, but it's not the best evidence. Usually, you need to get more evidence to make sure that you have the right person, if that's the case. Negative evidence, source is missing information that it should include. For example, if Susie Smith was born in 1858 and she does not appear with the rest of her family at the 1860 census, it is likely that she's died. A 2-year-old isn't going to go off by herself someplace. So that would be considered negative evidence. She's not there anymore. Now, older children, it's a little more iffy because a lot of times older children went out with other families. So.
What does that mean?
What?
Went out with?
Like, they might have been placed with other families for to help on a farm. You know, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, especially in the farming areas of this country, you know, there wasn't a lot of schools. They went out to work. And, you know, if they had family or friends that they needed help on their farm, sometimes they went there to live. Somebody had, you know, a bunch of children and the parents passed away. A lot of times the children split up and they went with other families or other relatives. So negative evidence is helpful in guiding you to the next step. FamilySearch is a site that is free, and it contains hundreds and hundreds of thousands of records that are digital images of original records. The Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, as part of their faith, believe that that they should be tracing their family back till they get to as much as they can, and then they become, in some faith-based ceremony, they become linked to their family in the afterlife. So that's part of the reason that they instigated this. They've been doing it for many, many years. They have a huge granite vault in Salt Lake City that has, you know, microfilms and stuff like that. Over the years, things have become digitized. They're no longer loaning out microfilms. If you need a film, you have to actually go to a family history center to look online at their place. But most of their stuff is visible. It's at least transcribed, or if not imaged. It'll tell you if you have to go to the site. It'll say, we have this image, but you can't look at it here. I actually had this happen to me a couple weeks ago, and I went to Bloomfield to look at it, and they didn't have it there either. I'm like, there's a wiki page. When you go to their website, if you go down at the bottom, there's a wiki, and it has a lot of information. For example, if you're wanting to look up records in Kansas, it has all kinds of information. If you just type in Kansas, it'll bring you to the Kansas page, and it'll show you where to go to get different records, and it'll have links. So it might take you to Ancestry, it might take you to the Kansas State Department of Archives or whatever. So it's very, very helpful. FamilySearch also allows you to put for free of charge, to put your work online. It's important that you remember that if you put your work on their webpage, anybody can change it. If it's out there more than once, people can merge them. I don't use that site. I actually don't have anything online except a couple of outside families, but for that reason. If you put your stuff on Ancestry, nobody can touch it. But once you put it out there, it becomes the property of Ancestry, and they can do whatever they want with it. They won't, I mean, you know, if you mark your tree private, they're not going to share it with somebody else. But if you have documents and stuff like that, I wouldn't say that they wouldn't use them. I mean, that's part of the thing that you sign up for when you use their thing, is that if you put stuff out there, it becomes their property.
Is that how they find all those other hints to sort of?
No, no. They have programs that will. So when you put a tree out there, if all of us are on the same tree, and I have a census for you, and you're still alive at that same time, and you're still alive at that same time, but I don't have the census for you, it will see if it can find you, and just say, check out this person. It might not be the right person. Mm-hmm. It's important that you don't just take it at face value, because there is on the family trees on Ancestry, I cannot tell you how many errors there are. One of my mother's cousins called me. I think he's my second cousin or something, third cousin, I don't know. He called me and asked me some family information. I gave him all the information I had. I spent a long time with him on the phone. He was hiring a professional genealogist in Ireland to find some stuff. And every single thing, he kept saying to me, well, my father said Jane, my father said Jane, Jane is my mother. My mother's name is Mary Jane. And I kept saying to him, her name is Mary Jane. Well, she goes by Jane. I said, she does go by Jane. That's her nickname. Her name is Mary Jane. And didn't he put it out there with Jane? And I mean, that's a very small thing. Some people just are wrong. The other day, I'm working on a project for somebody. The other day, I had to contact 3 people on Find a Grave and 1 person on Ancestry to say, you've got this woman hooked to the wrong husband. It was very clear if you looked at the gravestone that he was not, that it was a different husband. But people get very sloppy, and they just want to get the names, and to me it's more a thing of, let's get the story.
I have a question. In our collection, we have a number of published genealogies.
Yes.
Those are sometimes put up online, but those are the copyrighted, correct?
They are copyrighted, but if you source them, you can use them. But again, you have to be careful, because many of them are not sourced. My father's family from Rhode Island, there's a couple of sources with published genealogies that I trust, because I have gone through and found the same things that she found. So I trust her more than some other things. Other things you just see, and again, it's family lore. People handed down stuff and they said, well, this is what so-and-so said. And I think it's become more of a clean process over the years, that people are trying to be more exact, but not everybody. So, Ancestry is a subscription site. Again, thousands and thousands of records, and a lot of their records, or a lot of Family Searches records, you'll see, that they talk to each other now. I don't know what kind of arrangement they have, but there's the other thing that you can find on Ancestry that you don't find other places is, if people have put their trees up there, a lot of times they have pictures, which is really great. I mean, assuming you've got the right person. But a couple of years ago, I found my father's cousin, who he was very close to. I found their wedding picture on, one of my cousins had put their stuff out there, and I'm like, I've never seen it before. It was just really cool. I knew it was them because I knew who they were, but and again, there's many, many trees out there that have unsourced or false information. If you find a tree out there, it's fine to take that information and try and get a source for it. There oftentimes will be a source out there. Like sometimes you'll go out there and you'll click on your name and it'll say, oh, she was in the 1900 census, and she was 3 years old, and this is how I know it's the same family, da 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 da. Other times you'll just say, oh, I got it from this family tree. I just that's just useless to me if they got it from the other family tree. But
If you see a tree online and you click on it, like I have a tree on Ancestry, but I don't have there's no sources on that.
So do you have a subscription to Ancestry? Okay.
I did the DNA, so they did let me do the tree.
So you can hook your own sources to, like if you have sources from or images from other things, you can put your sources out there. Ancestry has this hints thing that they, like I said before, that if they find you on the census but not you guys, they'll say, oh, did you want to look at the census for this one, and did you want to look at the census and if you find them, you can attach it to that person. And Family Search does the same thing.
Pay in order to get that information.
So most libraries have a subscription. I don't know the answer to that if you don't have a subscription. I know that I can't suggest a change to a name, a transcription, a correction, if I try and do it at a library as opposed to on my own subscription. But that doesn't mean that you can't. I know you can download stuff. Like you can take pictures and send them to yourself in email or put them on a thumb drive.
If you're at the library.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, record types. Birth records. The vital records are, huge if you can get them. Local state records are kept to record the birth of a child. The records almost always include the child's surname, date of birth, gender, names of the parents, and the town of birth. Almost always. If you're lucky, they also contain the child's first name, the occupation of the father, the birthplace of the parents, the name of the person that attended the birth, midwife or doctor or whatever, and the registrar. You'd be surprised how many records don't have forenames. So you have to kind of use your judgment. This is an example. Some of these things are just pictures, so don't sweat it. I'm not asking you to look at this, but this is an example of a birth registry page.
For that writing.
The writing is tough, but honestly, if you if you can get it online, you can expand it. It's easier to read. The next type of vital records are marriage records. Local and state records are kept to keep the marriage ban or the marriage of a couple. Those records always include the bride's forename and surname, the groom's forename and surname, the date of the marriage, and the location of the marriage. Especially in New England, especially in Connecticut, that's all they cared about. They didn't care about the parents' names, anything. But if you're lucky, you can get the names of the parents, the ages of the bride and groom, the place of birth of the bride and groom, the occupation, if there is one of them, who the witnesses were, the name of the officiant, and the registrar. This is it's for the city of Fall River. This is a list of the red page from 1907. You can see that the names are clumped together with two. Husbands on the top, wives on the bottom. Death records, local or state records that are kept to record the death of a person. These records includes the deceased forename and surname, usually. Sometimes it just says Mr. or Mrs. Date of death, the cause of death and contributory causes if they're known, and the location of the death. Newer death records, and sometimes, if you're really lucky, older death records will contain the name of the parents and their place of birth. Not the parents' place of birth, but the deceased place of birth, the age, or the date of birth of the deceased, the place of birth of the deceased, occupation, spouse's name, if the person was married or widowed, the informant's name, which is often a family member. Sometimes it's a neighbor. Sometimes it'll say medical record, like if they have no family. And whether the deceased was a veteran, the name of the funeral home, and the cemetery. That's much more common in older records. I mean, older meaning like older, closer to here, closer to now. In the 1800s, it's very slim. And in some countries, they just didn't record them. So this is another example of a death record. Again, the writing is a challenge. You get used to it, believe it or not. There's other types of records besides vital records. There's Bible records, which are almost as good as vital records, and other family records. Bible records could record births, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. There's yearbooks. It's my second cousin, Joe McNulty, who died a couple of years ago, but this is his yearbook. It's in the South Kingston Library in Rhode Island. Lucy Ann Sherman is my third cousin, twice removed, but she lived in the next town over from me, 2 towns over from me. But that autograph book has it was signed in Westerly, but she lived in Lebanon. So there's a lot of fun things out there if you have any.
Writing?
Yep, that's from an autograph book.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And this autograph book is great because it has my great-great-grandmother and my great-great-grandfather's signature, and but you might have some fun stuff like that if they just gave you a box of stuff. Oh, yeah. And I apologize. This is a page from a Bible. This is a birth record page, but sometimes it'll say the time. This is the West family that my grandfather inherited. This is his brother-in-law was a West, and he inherited all this stuff from his wife's family. And it'll say the time that they were born, what day of the week it was, which you can find out online anyway. But it's really cool. Census records. Census records are incredibly valuable. The United States government has recorded a census of the population every 10 years since 1790. Each census contains different information, so it's important to be aware of where you can look for the information. There are blank census records in the other room if you want to take a look, but you can also get them online. Census records from 1790 to 1840 are strictly a hash count of the population by age, range, and only the head of the household is listed by name. So if the head of the household was living, if the head of the household was not a widow, you're not going to see any women's names. In 1850, every resident was listed by name. The relationship was not listed until 1880. You can presume the relationship, but it is not It would be considered secondary. It's not a given that the child that's living with the older adults are their child, or even that the older adults are married. If you find out some other way, then you can say, yes, that's true, but it's usually considered implied.
Wasn't there a year, my friend said that
1890.
that the records got burned?
The records, in 1890, there was a fire, I can't remember where exactly. It burned most of the census, and then they moved what was left someplace else, and there was another fire. Oh. There are only scraps of a couple of states left. I think there's a couple of scraps from Ohio. There, there are some. Most places have what they call census substitutes, which include city directories. New York City, there was a police census in 1890. So there are other things that people tried to do to try and put their people someplace at that time. But it's a huge gap. It's a huge gap because so many immigrants came in between 1880 and 1900. This is the census of 1880. This is the first time that the relationship was noted, and also whether the person was attending school and that kind of thing. I don't know, that was the first time it was attending school. Also, this was the first time that it listed where the parents' places of birth. Like place of birth, the state of birth where was always listed for the person, but not for necessarily for their parents. So this is a good indication of what, people who were immigrant. Like you could tell if they were born in Connecticut and if their parents were born in Canada, they immigrated.
Does it give? I can't see this. Does it give the year of the immigration?
Not in 1880. They do in 1900.
Oh, okay.
1900, 1910, 1920. And I'm not sure about 1930. Cemetery records. You can contact the cemetery office for location of burials for a person. The office should have the burial date and some names of whoever is buried with the person. Sometimes they have a cause of death. There are several free online databases where volunteers have documented burial information. Find a Grave is wonderful. It also belongs to Ancestry now. So someday it's going to be for fee, I'm sure.
So right now it's not. It's free.
It's free. It's free. Billion Graves is also free, but it has some kind of for pay component. Interment.net, I think they're free, but they don't have as many things. There's free searching, there's images on many records, there's obituaries included on some records. If you volunteer for them, there's also links to other family members on some records. Again, don't take that as gospel unless you go to the other record and you say, it says, the gravestone says, son of so-and-so. But, it's very helpful to put families together. You just have to be careful, like with everything else. This is a picture of my husband's great-grandfather's grave. His great-grandmother and their son, who died very young, are listed with him. This is a grave of 8, which is very, very common. 8 to 10 was a very common grave size for Irish and Italian Catholics and in Catholic cemeteries. This is at Mount St. Benedict's. When I went to the cemetery office to find out who else was buried here, they told me that Bridget and James weren't buried there. They don't know where they're buried, but they're listed there. So, it's good to check your sources. There were 7 other family members there. And one of them was a husband to one of the family members had married. And one of them was John's grandmother, my husband's grandmother. And I had never known where she was buried. So she's buried here, but her name's not there. And I looked into getting that done, but it's really a lot of money. Also, and I'm not trying to overwhelm anybody. If I'm going too fast, say so. There's a lot of information. Once you get into this a little bit more, once you get past what we've talked about so far, you can go into further records. Immigration records, there's passenger lists. Name and age are standard. If that's all included, it's going to be really hard to verify that that's your person. You would not believe the names that there are many of. Names that come from Hungary and Poland and Russia and Germany, and you just think, oh, nobody else has this name, and there's like 28 people out there in Pennsylvania that have that name, you know? So it's, you know, as time went on, later lists include the last known relative in the country of origin, where they were traveling to, how much money they have, and the color of their eyes, hair, weight, and height, which is really fun. My stepdaughter is, calling her 4'11" is generous. Her mother is only about 5 feet, 5'1", and we always thought that her height was from her mom. Well, I finally found, years ago, I found John's grandmother coming in from Ireland. She was 4'4". So it was really fun to find that. Yep. It was really fun to find that. It's just, there's very interesting things. There's also, some of the sites have records where, did I keep that? I don't have it. Some of the sites have records where if they were detained, if they weren't allowed in, why they were detained, and that's interesting. And sometimes they were allowed in, and sometimes they were sent back. But that's also got some good information: how long they stayed there, how many meals they ate. You know, the reason that they were detained. Most often, people were detained because they were likely to become a public charge. They had nobody here, or they, you know, there was other reasons. I'll tell you another one later. But this is page 1 of a passenger list manifest. I didn't put them the other way because it would be harder to read, but whatever. The passenger manifests are very difficult to read. The writing is really a challenge. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are typed, but that's very rare. And this is one that came in to New York. There's 2 full pages, and like I said, the different things that are included depends on how big the page. Sometimes you'll just see a name, an age, and where they came from, what port they came in.
I can barely read.
No, you can't. The purpose wasn't to read it. I don't want you to feel like, and I can show you those later.
I see the word nephew.
Yeah. So sometimes people were going to see a relative, like, so, you know, if they had sponsors here, their relative would be mentioned and where they were going. This is the second page, and you can see that that cramped stuff in that 4th column there is an address, a name and address of where they're going. Naturalization records. For years, the only thing that was available online were the indexes for naturalization records. If you can find an index, you can order the naturalization records from the National Archives. More and more of these documents have been digitized and they're being put online. There's a lot that aren't there though, so don't be disappointed. And not everybody became a citizen. But you can tell on the censuses, it'll say whether they became naturalized or if they're still an alien. If they became naturalized, you should be able to at least find them in the index, and then in the index you can take the number and send for it. But more and more of the declarations and the petitions and the oaths are being shown up online. If you are lucky enough to find those, they are an absolute wealth of information. They have the wife's name, where she was born, their name, where they were born, the ages of their children, their dates of birth. I mean, it's like a gold mine.
Is that something you would find on Ancestry?
Yes, you can. They don't, like I said, they haven't all been done. I haven't found, I don't think I found anybody on my family, but I have done projects for other people where I found a lot.
Is there a time frame in history where it's more likely that you're going to find those?
No, it seems to be more of a place. This
City would be good.
yeah, forget that. You can get this, the index card in New York City. I have my great grandfather's index card, and you can take that and request the form online. There's you submit it, and they'll send you the stuff. This is my old job share partner. This is her father-in-law's grandfather, and this is all I expected to see. Well, when I got, of course I didn't. This is he was a weaver, he was white, he was 160 pounds, he was a fair complexion, 5 feet 7 inches tall. He had a small scar on his left little and middle finger. Like, it's got so much great information. This is the Declaration of Intent. The petition, I think, has the children's information on it.
What is Declaration of Intent?
A declaration of intent is when you say, I'm going to become a citizen, and you file what they call first papers.
Oh.
And you say, I'm going to do that. And you have to be here a certain amount of time to do that, and you have to pass a test and whatever. A lot of people didn't follow through on that, but sometimes on the census you'll see it'll just say PA. Instead of NA, it says PA. That means if they filed papers. They're not citizens, but they filed papers.
PA means file papers?
It means papers.
Oh, papers.
So they filed a declaration, but you might not ever find a petition or an oath because sometimes they didn't follow through, and I don't know, who knows why they didn't follow through, but the petition for naturalization has the name of the declarant, the location of the court, the age, the physical description, the date of birth, the date they arrived in America and on which ship, and the country of origin from which they will be renouncing citizenship. I have found on more than one occasion that the petition has different ship name than the declaration. It's almost like they didn't remember. And again, you have to remember that these people came here from other countries. They didn't speak the language. They couldn't read or write English in a lot of cases. They might read or write their own language, but then you're leaving it up to them to remember what they've done. And the oath of allegiance is on the back of this, and once they've done that, they're citizens. This is another example of a petition. This is the full petition, and the date that it was signed. The oath of allegiance is on the back, and they renounced their allegiance from the other country. How are we doing? Is everybody having a heart attack yet?
Actually, as you're going through this, I feel like I'm really in good shape. Actually, my girlfriend is a member of Ancestry, and a couple of years ago, she ran off a lot of stuff for me.
Yeah, and if you can get pictures, that's wonderful. Did you have something?
I didn't get pictures, but one of the things when you were talking about the census and you were just talking about the language difficulties is that the census, like whoever was doing the census, and if English was like the second language, like my mother's side is Italian, sometimes I don't think they understood the name. Whoever was taking the census didn't write the name correctly, or they would say it was a son, and then later, a couple censuses later, the same name for a similar name, they're a daughter. So,
and that's very true. And in this day and age, we get our census in the mail, and it has your name on it, or your spouse's name or whatever. You fill it out for your family. Bye bye. In the old days, they went door to door, and if the person wasn't home, they asked the neighbor. So if the neighbor had bad information, or if they didn't know, they could have estimated date, ages, that kind of thing. Don't take those things as gospel. Don't think that if you have somebody that's, 13 in one census, but in the next census they're only 20, that's wrong. First of all, they lied about their age all the time. Second of all, I don't think they knew their age half the time. I think half these people didn't know when they were born.
Mm-hmm. I found a lot of inconsistencies in the census.
And I'm doing a project right now for someone whose family is from Mississippi, and they bought homestead parcels. There was no schools. None of them were able to read or write. And they weren't immigrants. They didn't go to school. They didn't send their kids to school. They all worked this farm. That's how it was. So there are land records usually. Land grants is a grant of a public land to an institution or an organization or a group of people. There's different kinds of deeds. I broke through one of my biggest brick walls finding a deed from a great-great-grandfather that had passed away. I could not find his daughter. And in the land records, I found his widow, and she listed the 3 minor children that were still living with her. And there she was. people think, well, what do I don't need to look at land records for? You'd be surprised. It's really, you don't have to use them, but there's a lot of times there's really good information in there. You can, and that's all public record. Like if you want to go to the Simsbury Town Hall and look up who bought, you know, the history of your property, you can do that. It doesn't cost anything. Quitclaim, mortgage deeds are a document in which the mortgagor transfers interest in a real estate to mortgagee for the purpose of providing a loan. Warranty deeds are a deed that guarantees a clear title of the buyer for the real property. So once you've paid off your mortgage, you get a warranty deed. Quitclaims are an instrument that uses to transfer interest in a real property, and essentially it's the entity transferring its interest is called the grantor, and when the quitclaim due is properly completed and executed, it transfers any interest the grantor has in the property to the recipient, and that's called the grantee. When one of my uncles, my grandfather's brother, was shell-shocked in the war, and they inherited a property from a family member, and all the sisters and my grandfather just signed, and I have the deed, signed it over to him, and it was his property for the rest of his life. They lost, you know, they didn't have any interest in it after they signed that over. And that was kind of, that was an interesting thing to see, too. Plat maps are a document that are drawn to scale of an area. They show the divisions of the piece of land. It gives a legal description of pieces of land and real property on the lot, street, and block number. You can get plat maps often at town halls. You can get them at the State Library for Connecticut. I'm not a big map person, but sometimes it's fun to see where people live. And actually, I actually went when I was in Ireland last to visit where one of my relatives lived, and I did that by using a map. So, you know, finding it, figuring it out through a map. Probate records are another gold mine. There's administration records and there's a will. There's not always a will. There's more often an administration record, but sometimes there's not even that. An administration is the management of and the settlement of the estates of the intestate person. The administration is usually done under court supervision and by appointing a person duly qualified and legally appointed. The person so appointed is called an administrator. The administrator is responsible for administering and settling the estate pursuant to the statutory rules of descent and distribution. So oftentimes if you look up a thing, it'll just say, oh, this person died, Alison's the administrator, and it doesn't say anything else. Sometimes it'll have an inventory of everything that they left. And sometimes it'll have a distribution where the things that they left went. The distribution can be very helpful. An administrator is often a friend or relative. The will is usually written by the person themselves and generally names all their children. Sometimes their wife, if they're still living, all their children. Sometimes it will say, except for this person's getting nothing. Like they're fun. They're fun to look at. You can also get married names of daughters in probate records. Like I said, there's an inventory, a distribution, there's guardianship papers. If the parents die, a lot of times in a probate record you'll find who their guardian was, so you can kind of trace what happened to that person after their parents died. Okay, newspaper items. Newspapers can be found online or at local or state libraries. I have got to tell you that I bought my first newspaper subscription about a year ago. I bought newspapers.com. It is, without question, the best money I've ever spent because of the kind of thing that I like to find on people. I don't like to just gather names and dates, and I like to have a more rounded story. You can find obituaries, funeral notices, birth notices, engagement, wedding notices, foreclosures, bankruptcy notices, visitations. Oh, so-and-so went to visit so-and-so last week. So an anniversary party notices. Like I called my mother the other week because I was looking for something else in Ohio, and I found her father and her grandmother with two of his oldest sister, who fell off the face of the earth, but here she was 10 years later, after I last knew of her, traveling with the mother and another sister and a brother, visiting relatives in Ohio. That's all it said. And I was just like, but they said the name of the other relative, so I knew I knew it was my person. So they're just fun. I have all kinds of snippets of so-and-so was arrested for disorderly conduct. Just little things like that, but they're fun. They're really fun to read, and you get a lot of information, and they're indexed, which is wonderful, because for years, if you had to go to the library to look up an obituary, you might have to go through, a long time before you found something, if you ever find it. They're not always in there. This is an example of something that I found in the newspaper that was just friends and family gathered together for a party and it just describes who was there, why they were having the party and that kind of thing. It's just fun information. This is a newspaper article that is similar to an obituary, but it was an account that he and his son were driving. The car went into a tree. He died. The son was driving. It was a little bit background about where he came from. He came from Syria, that kind of thing. And DNA. There's quite a few, there's several things that do DNA. I don't know if I know somebody, you had your DNA done.
23andMe, what would that be?
It's just a different company. Ancestry, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, and MyHeritage all have DNA programs. Some of them you can get, you could get yours done on Ancestry or someplace, and you can download it for like a nominal fee, like $19 to some of the other places. It depends. They watch for specials if you haven't had it done, because they go on sale pretty inexpensively. Some of the companies will take the test results from other companies and incorporate them into their database for a modest fee. Watch for sales. Okay, I already said all that. Okay, well, there you go.
Can I ask a question about that DNA? If you have siblings, and everybody wanted to do their DNA, should you do it from the same company? Because my sister, there's three of us. We all did it from a different company.
Well, you can download your stuff to the other company. You can take your thing. I just this week read a very interesting article, and it was that a set of identical twins who have identical DNA sent their DNA into the 5 top companies, and every single one of them sent back different ancestry reports. Not like when you match their DNA up, they match, but what their long-term ancestry, this one had 10% this, the other one had 25% this. This is a tool. It's not the ancestry and your DNA is your DNA, but the ancestry and where you came from is more of depends on how many people are in their database. Ancestry and 23andMe have both recently done a huge update, and my ancestry numbers changed. But the percentage of my ancestry changed.
They sent an email that said,
"Yep,
now they didn't find it or did something."
Yep, and 23andMe did it at the same time Ancestry did, and 23andMe did it again last week. And it's not that far off. And don't forget, if you have sisters, you inherit 50% of your DNA from your mother and 50% of your DNA from your father, but not necessarily the same 50% that your sisters.
And it's so different. It was just the numbers were so different.
Yeah, and that's very interesting too, because my 3 kids did it, and Stephen and Kelly look very much alike, and theirs were almost exactly the same numbers. And Tierney, who's my youngest, was she had a lot more Irish. She had no Italian, which my mother-in-law's father was Italian. The other 2 had Italian. She had no Italian. It was like, so.
Yeah. It's sort of fascinating.
When you're doing the 23andMe, go into the gears and adjust the probability rating. Because
Yes.
23andMe has it at 50%. If you move that up to 80 and 90%, you go, oh, I'm still that much unidentified, because it's all just a big pot of
It
soup.
is a pot of soup. That's exactly.
With Ancestry DNA, I'm 77 point something percent British Isles. Guess what I am on 23andMe? 39%. 37 German. So it's not a perfect.
It's not perfect, but
It's
for ancestry estimates, it's not perfect. But your DNA is your DNA. So if your DNA does not match somebody at all, that's significant. Not the estimates. You asked about the thing on TV, Finding Your Roots.
Yeah.
Did you guys watch the first one for this season?
Who was that?
I tried to watch.
It's on public television.
I know.
And
I
it's
didn't see it.
I cannot think of the guy that wrote Game of Thrones and the guy that's on Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Martin wrote that.
They did those two, and they didn't have a lot of luck with the guy from Game of Thrones, but the other one. And again, somebody's doing this professionally, and there are people in Boston at the New England Historical and Genealogical Society are doing this. They've got people combing the thing. And they found out it was the most incredible story. It really, if you can go back and watch it, you should. It was really an incredible story. They found a picture of his grandfather. His mother was adopted. They found a picture of his grandfather. Honest to God, he was the spit of him. It was incredible. It really was. So. Anyway, this is just another tool. Don't get too hung up on it. This last couple pages is links. It says what the category are, and I thought it said what was. Oh, it does on the top. Idiot. Okay, free websites are the first couple of pages, then subscription websites, library websites. There's different libraries throughout the country that specialize in genealogy, so you can log into them, and if you join them, you can look at their stuff usually. There's professional services and DNA links, the Connecticut Society of Genealogists, the American Professional Genealogists, New England Association of Professional Genealogists, and then the DNA stuff. And that is it.
So if you go onto these links, this information is free? Or not necessarily?
To find out about it is free.
Okay.
Like you can go to the Connecticut Society of Genealogists webpage and look around, but you can't go into the member area unless you're a member. If you want to look at vital records in Connecticut, you must be a member.
Do you know how much it is to join the Connecticut?
$35, I think,
So it's
a
not
year.
a real lot.
You have to look for where you're going to be, if you're going to be going into town halls or state things, to look at their requirements about what you need to know. You must be certified, you must have a membership in Connecticut, you must have a membership in an approved genealogical society. Not all the genealogical societies are approved. So, just because you have membership in Massachusetts or Rhode Island does not mean you have approval to go to Connecticut.
But if you have a membership, you don't necessarily have to be like a genealogist or
No.
trained or whatever.
No, you have to agree to the rules.
Okay.
You have to agree to not share information on living people. You have to agree to not share illegitimate births, or that are not a certain amount of years old, that kind of thing. You have to agree to be professional. You have to agree to not damage any public records. Just different things like that. Questions?
Is there,
You look like
I'm sorry for asking so many questions, but
no, please.
I'm interested in finding out more about my father's World War II service, and is there a website for that?
Some of that stuff is the draft registration cards are online for sure.
I have his draft registration. I'm interested. He was in the Pacific. I was interested in where he was and what he was doing, and the movement of that particular unit. And
I would suggest that you go to the National Archives and Records Administration and see what they have on their website for that kind of thing. I'm sure you can request the records. Like I have my in-laws, both my mother-in-law and father-in-laws, discharge papers, and that has that information on it. Like when they were discharged, it says they were on, you know, the Franklin from da-da-da-da date to this date. You know, what theater they were in. They were in the Pacific Theater, that kind of thing, or he was.
I have something like that. It's the National Archives, and what did you say?
Records Administration. It's called NARA, N-A-R-A. That link is in here.
Oh, it is? Okay. Great.
There was a big ugly message there last week. Due to the government shutdown, none of the records are being updated. It's this bottom one.
Okay.
Archives.gov. And it's an enormous site. It has a lot of information, but you should be able to find out, you know, like if you type in and search, where do I find World War II records, you should be able to find it out. My father's records were one of there was a whole group of records in the 70s that were burned. There was a fire in Kansas City or something. My father was a Korean War vet, and all those records were burned. So you can't always find them, but. Any other questions? It's a lot of information. So one of the other things I'm going to ask you guys to do. I'm going to send you I'll send you this so you can have it online and you can expand it if you want to look at things. What I'm going to do, I'd like some feedback if you don't mind, because if it's too much, I want to slow it down. If it's not enough for some people. I'm here the second and fourth Saturdays of the month.
And what do you do?
If anybody wants to come in and needs help with their stuff, I'd be happy to help you.
Do people go online, or do they work on a computer, or?
There are computers here that they can work on.
Or do they bring their materials and you go over it?
That's what's happened mostly since I've been here. I have only been here a few months though.
Okay.
But yes, you can go online, but because you live further away, you can get to a closer place, a closer library that will have those subscriptions online.
Okay. Well, my library in Berlin has Ancestry.
Yeah.
But my problem was because it's like a desktop, and you're sitting here, and the desktop's there, and it's like I couldn't see the information.
Yeah.
It was like so far away.
Yeah.
Even enlarging it, I just had trouble seeing a lot of it.
So, you know.
Sometimes you don't know what you're looking at.
Right, and I think my whole thing, start with FamilySearch, because FamilySearch really has a lot of stuff, and it's free. Look on FamilySearch, because a lot of stuff is there, and if they send you to Ancestry, you at least can write down what, like on their wiki page that I was talking about, you can at least write down where you need to look on Ancestry. So.
Is it unusual for somebody just wanting to do their family tree, what do I call it, like straight line? I don't really want to get into all the aunts and uncles and the family history like my mom wants to. I'm more interested in connecting to, okay, these are my lines, my grandparents. That's who, at first, I want to see how far back I can go and fill in that tree.
So a lot of people feel that way. The man I'm working for right now asked me to do that because, you know, he got back to a certain point and he wants to go back further, and I said, you got a lot of stuff out here. But it's not all real sussed out. So my thing is that you can't operate in a vacuum. You know, if you know who your parents and your grandparents are, after you get past that, you might not know who you're talking about, or maybe, you know, maybe there's 5 people with the same name, especially in Catholic families, French, Italian, and Irish. Dear God. And there was a naming convention, and they're all named the same. You know, the first son was named after the father's father. The first daughter was named after the mother's mother. Then it went to the other person, and then it went to the father and the mother after that, and you know, you come across dozens of people with the same name.
For 3 generations, I'll have several.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you
Generations of the same exact, even the women, because I found out that in Germany, for instance, and that area,
another Catholic,
they would name their children after whoever was running the country at the time. So there's a lot of.
But I mean, if you have three
a lot of
sisters,
Maria, Katharina, they'd have 5 names, but, yeah.
but if you have sisters and brothers that are all having children at the same time and using the same naming convention, it is very difficult to sort that stuff out. So the reason that's helpful to go beyond just the direct line is to make sure you have the right group. It's not that it's wrong to do that. One of the brick wall that I told you about earlier that I found in the land record, one of the things that pointed me to the correct family name was that I found her niece living with them in some random Rhode Island state census. And I was just like, that's the right family. You know, it depends on how far you want to get into it. There's nothing right or wrong, you know.
Like my mom, but she always knew how German they were. No, you're not, Mom, you're half English. You know, it was all these family stories, and she still wants to tell me all about, you know, well, this one was a college professor, and this one made furniture, and this. But she's only going back 3 generations. Like, get past that. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to my mother, her Irish grandparents sprang fully formed from Ireland into the Bronx. Well, after years of searching in New York, I found them in the 1880 census in Ohio. Oh yeah, I was named after a cousin from Ohio. You know, and that's where I found the other thing. You know, it's interesting. And then at one point, they lived in Manhattan, and then they moved to the Bronx, then they moved to Brooklyn, then they moved back to the Bronx, and she had no idea. She couldn't figure out why one of her uncles went to school someplace because it was in Brooklyn.
Well, you're lucky to have somebody to ask. I don't have anybody
That's
to
why
ask any
I'm doing
questions
it,
to.
because my father passed away 12 years ago, and I talked to my dad's cousin, so my second cousin, and he's now, you know, pushing 80. He told me some family things that you don't really want to hear. But could he tell me any other family names? Oh no, I don't know any of that. So talking to some people doesn't always get you anywhere.
No, my grandmother's youngest brother, or second to youngest brother, always tells me about one of his uncles who left. He left. After a dance, there was some kind of something, a fight, and someone was injured or someone was killed, and he left. And he lived in New Jersey, and he had a son who was named the same thing. Well, I finally, after many years, I did find him in Los Angeles, where he died. I don't think he had a child. I don't think he ever married. And I've never found any newspaper articles about a fight or any death or anything like that. But it's just funny what you hear from people. I mean, something happened, obviously.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.